Live on national television, a debate meant to spotlight economic innovation took a hard turn into chaos when Jasmine Crockett shifted the entire energy of the room without raising her voice, and Karoline Leavitt just sat there stunned. The broadcast had been live for 14 minutes, and up to that point, it had followed the usual script. Two women on opposite political sides, trading predictable lines about jobs, infrastructure, taxes, and what freedom looks like in 22.5. But then Jasmine shifted in her seat, eyes narrowing just a bit. And instead of responding to Karoline's comment about Democrat overreach in tech regulation, she leaned closer to the mic. Her voice low but precise. "I think it's wild," Jasmine said, "that we're up here talking about tech growth and job creation when we've got billionaires like Elon Musk using their platforms to quietly bankroll political chaos. And no one wants to say his name or talk about how that money gets moved around." Karoline blinked. Her smile didn't fade, but her jaw tightened slightly. Jasmine kept going. Cool, steady, no notes, no hesitation. "Because if we're talking about political influence, let's talk about how Trump's campaign got a 7-figure boost right after Musk had that private weekend retreat in Texas with 3 donors who now suddenly run think tanks pushing election denial. No jokes, no jabs, just the facts." And the room started to shift. This wasn't the usual political TV tension. This was colder, heavier. The kind of silence where everyone in the control room stops breathing for a second. The host opened his mouth, then closed it. Karoline's smile dropped only slightly, but it was enough. Jasmine continued. "One of those donors," she said, pointing casually, "has ties to a lobbying group flagged by the EU for foreign digital interference. And the other two, well, one sits on the board of a shell company that donated almost $1 million to a PAC supporting January 6 defendants. And Karoline wants to sit here and talk about Democrats being radical." Karoline finally responded, her voice tighter than before. "That's an unverified theory," Jasmine nodded. "Is it unverified? Or just uncomfortable? Because your own party's communications team posted about that PAC last fall, then wiped every mention of it in December. We all noticed that. And don't worry, I've got screenshots." Karoline reached for her water bottle, ... Her hand not quite steady. Her eyes darted briefly off camera. The host coughed, trying to reset. "All right, let's keep this to economics." Jasmine cut him off. "This is economics. This is how political power is purchased in 22.5. With crypto, with shell companies, with tweets ... And silence from people too scared to say anything because billionaires might stop funding their next campaign. No one said anything for almost 5 seconds. It doesn't sound like much, but on live TV, that's forever. Long enough for everyone in the studio to feel it. The tension ... the shift. And in that silence, something changed. Back in the studio, Karoline tried to recover. She leaned forward, tried to sound composed. "We don't smear private citizens on national TV," she said. Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm not smearing. I'm reading documents." She tapped the folder in front of her. "You can ask the FEC why they've opened a quiet file on one of those donors last month. And while you're at it, ask Elon why his media platform boosted a now banned hashtag hours after the Mar-a-Lago dinner, where Trump first pitched his immunity speech to donors in private." Karoline didn't speak. The host tried to smile. Tried to shift gears, but you could feel it. No one was listening to policy anymore. They were watching body language ... Watching the sweat. The hesitations ... As the room simmered in silence, it became evident that Karoline was losing her grip. She glanced at the host, a man who'd been known for his calm composure, but even he looked unsettled. His fingers toyed with the papers on the desk, unable to hide his discomfort. The camera zoomed in slowly, almost as if it were amplifying the tension that had settled between the two women. Jasmine, however, remained unshaken, poised in her chair like a predator awaiting her next move. She wasn't just speaking. She was dropping bombs, and she knew it. With the calmest of smiles, she glanced at Karoline once more, daring her to respond. But the words didn't come. Karoline was trapped. What was supposed to be a simple debate had now morphed into a political minefield, and Karoline, despite her polished demeanor, was standing on shaky ground. The host, sensing the shift, cleared his throat loudly, trying to pull the conversation back onto safer territory. Let's focus on the issues at hand. We're discussing campaign finance reform, not private dinners or Twitter accounts, he said, his voice a bit too loud, too insistent, almost as if he were trying to convince himself more than the audience. But Jasmine was already on a roll, and she wasn't backing down. We are talking about campaign finance, she shot back, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. This is exactly what happens when money from corporate interests and foreign entities seeps into our elections. This is the kind of behind-the-scenes influence that makes a mockery of the democratic process. And no one is talking about it because the people involved are too powerful, too well-connected. Karoline's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond immediately. Her fingers trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the desk, a visible sign of how much the pressure was mounting. Jasmine wasn't just criticizing policies anymore. She was exposing a corrupt system that stretched far beyond the typical partisan arguments. And every word that left her mouth was like a nail in Karoline's political coffin. The room was heavy now, the air thick with uncertainty. The host, trying to regain control, shifted in his seat. This is serious. But we need to be cautious about making accusations without solid evidence, he said, though his voice was now strained. Jasmine didn't flinch, her eyes locked onto Karoline, daring her to question her next move. I don't make accusations, I present facts, she said simply, her tone cool but unyielding. And the facts are simple. We have documents showing that these foreign donations were funneled into Trump's campaign. And the paper trail leads straight to Musk's companies. If that's not worth talking about, I don't know what is. The host opened his mouth, likely to intervene once again, but Jasmine was already on the offensive. Tell me, Karoline, are you really going to sit here and pretend like you don't know what's going on behind the scenes? She leaned in closer, her words now slow, deliberate. Because I've got a mountain of evidence. And I'm more than happy to share it. Karoline's face flushed a deep shade of red as she tried to steady herself. This wasn't part of the plan. She was supposed to be the confident rising star, the one who could go toe-to-toe with anyone. But here she was, stumbling, her words failing her. She opened her mouth, trying to form a response, but nothing came out. The silence stretched. And it felt like an eternity. Outside the studio, the producers were frantically scrambling, trying to get a sense of what was happening in real time. Their nervous whispers echoed through the earpieces, but on screen, it looked like the world had stopped. There was no movement. No quick recovery. The tension was too thick. And then, just as Karoline seemed ready to speak, Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms with a slight, almost imperceptible smirk. You know, I've been wondering, Jasmine said, breaking the silence in the most casual way possible. How many other political figures are willing to do business with billionaires who have questionable ties to foreign governments, just because it gets them closer to power? Karoline's lips pressed into a thin line, but still no words came. The host's voice broke through the quiet, but his tone was no longer assertive. It sounded almost like a plea. Let's stay on topic. We're discussing policies here. Jasmine nodded slowly, as if considering his words. I'm on topic, she said softly. This is exactly what we should be talking about. How these billionaire elites get their hands on power. How they use money to buy influence. And how they manipulate our entire system. It's not just about campaign finance reform anymore. It's about who is really pulling the strings behind the scenes. For a moment, the entire room seemed to exhale collectively. Jasmine's words were hanging in the air, heavy and undeniable. Karoline's facade was slipping. Her polished, well-rehearsed talking points were no longer enough to shield her. The audience at home could feel it, the way the power dynamics had shifted. And Karoline had no choice but to sit there, silent and exposed. In the final moments of the segment, it was clear to anyone watching that the game had changed. Jasmine had dismantled Karoline's narrative piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the cold, hard truth. The damage was done, but it wasn't over. Not yet. Jasmine's words still hung in the air like a challenge, daring anyone to respond, daring Karoline to recover from this political bombshell. And in that silence, the host could only sit back, powerless to stop what had already become a moment for the history books. The clock was ticking ... and we were all waiting for what would come next. The seconds dragged on, and what had started as a typical political discussion had now spiraled into something far more dramatic. The studio felt like it had become a pressure cooker, the walls seemingly closing in on Karoline. She could feel the weight of Jasmine's words pressing down on her. Each syllable a calculated strike aimed at dismantling her credibility. The host, his earlier calm demeanor now replaced with an edge of uncertainty, glanced nervously at the control room. The producers were silent in his earpiece, but their absence spoke volumes. They had no clue how to steer the conversation back on track. Jasmine was no longer just the person at the table. She had taken complete command of the room. The camera angle shifted slightly, as if even the camera itself was aware of the power shift. Karoline could feel it. Her composure was slipping away, and she knew it. Her heartbeat was the loudest thing she could hear in the moment, pounding in her chest as she gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning white. The harsh fluorescent lights above seemed to shine down on her like a spotlight, making her sweat, making her feel small. Her mind raced, trying to find an escape, a way to claw back control. The host shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but Jasmine had already anticipated his next move. "You know," Jasmine began, her voice smooth, calculated, "I understand why Karoline might want to dodge the issue. After all, this is a high-stakes game we're playing here. The people involved in these deals, Trump, Musk, are billionaires with connections that stretch across continents. They don't just make donations, they move mountains. They have the kind of influence that changes the course of elections, all while sitting comfortably behind closed doors." She paused for a moment, letting the weight of her words hang in the air. Karoline's jaw clenched, but still, she said nothing. The host tried once again to steer the conversation, his voice rising a bit higher now. "Jasmine, we should focus on the larger issue of reform, not get lost in accusations. This isn't about individuals, it's about the system." But Jasmine was unrelenting. "No, this is exactly about individuals," she said, her voice cutting through the host's attempts to pivot. "This is about a system that allows people like Trump and Musk to manipulate the very system they claim to be fixing. You can talk about policy all you want, but until we start talking about who's financing these campaigns, who's pulling the strings, we're not addressing the core issue." The host looked lost for words. Karoline had to respond now. She had no choice. Her lips parted, and for a moment, it seemed like she might regain control of the situation. But then, her voice faltered. She started, but the words didn't come out the way she wanted them to. She cleared her throat, trying again, but still, nothing. It was as if the words were caught in her throat, trapped by the gravity of the accusation Jasmine had just made. She had been blindsided, caught in the crossfire of a political war she hadn't expected to be fighting today. Jasmine didn't miss a beat. "You know, Karoline," she said, her eyes locked onto Karoline's with an almost predatory intensity. "I get it. It's hard to confront the truth, especially when it involves people with so much power. But here's the thing: people are watching. Real people who know how the system works. They don't want to hear your polished talking points about policies that don't address the root of the problem. They want answers. There was a long, pregnant pause as Karoline sat there, her face flushed with a mix of anger and frustration. The camera lingered on her, capturing every detail of her discomfort. The host, trying once more to salvage the segment, turned to Jasmine, his voice now strained with the effort to regain control. "I think we should focus on the bigger picture." But Jasmine's sharp retort cut him off. "This is the bigger picture. The influence of billionaires, the foreign donations, the backdoor deals. This is the world we're living in. This is the reality of modern elections, and Karoline knows it. She's sitting here pretending that these connections don't exist, but the documents are real. The payments are real." Karoline's face twisted, a mix of disbelief and fury. Her hands were shaking now, but she clenched them into fists, trying to regain her composure. She wasn't prepared for this kind of public humiliation. She wasn't prepared for Jasmine to be so relentless, so uncaring about the political decorum she had worked so hard to maintain. This was supposed to be a professional debate, a back and forth that would elevate her career, not destroy it. But Jasmine wasn't playing by those rules. She was throwing everything she had at Karoline, and Karoline, despite her training and experience, couldn't handle the barrage. The host, his voice now barely above a whisper, asked, "Jasmine, do you have any proof of these claims? You're talking about serious allegations." Jasmine's eyes never wavered from Karoline's. "Proof?" she said with a cold laugh. "I've got more than proof. I've got the documents, the emails, the wire transfers. You can keep pretending like this is some conspiracy theory, but the truth is out there, and Karoline knows it. She's just hoping you don't notice." Karoline's lips parted once more, but no sound came out. She was paralyzed. The words were stuck in her throat, and with every second that passed, her credibility was slipping further away. The silence stretched on, suffocating. The host, his hands trembling slightly now, turned to the camera, trying to regain some semblance of order. "I think we've taken this as far as we can for today," he said, his voice weak. "We'll need to wrap this up." But Jasmine wasn't done. "Not until we talk about the bigger picture," she said firmly. "Not until we talk about what this means for the future of our elections and how people like Karoline here are willing to turn a blind eye as long as the money keeps flowing. But don't worry, Karoline. The truth always comes out. And you'll have to answer for this one day." The host looked at her, unsure of how to proceed, but Jasmine didn't care. She had already won. And as the cameras began to pan out, Karoline was left there, speechless, stunned, exposed. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no denying it anymore. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted irreparably. What had started as a political debate had turned into a crucible of public scrutiny, and Karoline Leavitt was now the subject of intense heat. Her face, once confident and assured, was now etched with a mix of anger and disbelief. Her thoughts scrambled, desperately trying to catch up with the barrage of information that Jasmine had just unleashed. The world was watching. The cameras, the crew, the producers, everyone could feel the tension, the palpable unease that had settled in the room. Even the host, whose job it was to maintain order, seemed to falter under the weight of Jasmine's words. His attempt to regain control had failed miserably, and the truth hung heavily in the air. Jasmine Crockett, unbothered by the shift in dynamic, sat back in her chair, arms crossed confidently. Her eyes never wavered from Karoline, and the camera, still focused on her, captured every subtle movement, every slight twitch of her expression. It was as if she had all the time in the world. She was in control now, her earlier frustration transformed into a quiet but undeniable strength. Jasmine didn't need to shout or raise her voice. Her words were sharp enough to cut through the tension, and she knew Karoline had nothing left to say. She had been exposed. And yet, despite the heat of the moment, Karoline remained silent. The silence stretched on, long and uncomfortable, as the weight of Jasmine's accusations settled in. She could feel the eyes of the studio crew on her, the pressure of the cameras inching closer, pulling her into a vortex of vulnerability. The stakes had never been higher. This was more than just a political skirmish. It was a battle for her credibility, her reputation, and her future in politics. In that moment, Karoline realized how precarious her position was. The revelation of foreign donations, the whispers of influence from power players like Trump and Musk, had turned this debate into something far more dangerous than she had ever anticipated. The host, clearly rattled, tried once more to take the reins. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's try to refocus on the issues at hand," he said, his voice shaky, but it was obvious his words lacked conviction. The room, which had once been filled with the energy of a live broadcast, now felt eerily still. The crew, usually accustomed to managing the flow of the show, seemed paralyzed by the unfolding drama. There were no instructions in the earpieces, no direction from the producers. It was as if everyone had collectively agreed to let this moment play out, to let the truth hang in the air and see how Karoline would respond. But Karoline didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind raced, but her mouth was dry. She had never expected to be caught in such a situation. She had prepared for a battle of words, for the usual sparring between political adversaries. But this was a different level. Jasmine's words were more than just accusations. They were revelations. And the documents, the evidence Jasmine claimed to have, only made it worse. Karoline knew she was on the verge of losing everything. Her career, her reputation, her political future, it was all teetering on the edge, and she had no idea how to pull herself back. Jasmine, sensing the vulnerability, didn't let up. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locked onto Karoline's with a steely resolve. "It's not just about the money, Karoline," she continued, her voice a calm, cutting tone. "It's about the system. The system that allows people like Trump and Musk to manipulate the very process they claim to be fixing. They make the rules, and then they break them, all while making billions off the backs of regular people. And you, Karoline, you're not just complicit in it. You're trying to cover it up. You're sitting here, pretending like these foreign donations don't matter, like they won't affect the future of our elections, but they will. And you know it." The words landed with the weight of a hammer. Karoline felt as if the ground beneath her was slipping away. Jasmine was right. She had been part of the system. She had been complicit in it. And now she was being held accountable, not by the media, but by someone who wasn't afraid to call out the truth. The host, now completely sidelined, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unsure of how to regain any sense of control. His eyes flicked back and forth between the two women, clearly out of his depth. Let's keep this civil, please," he stammered, trying to reassert some authority. "This is about campaign finance reform. Let's not lose sight of the bigger picture." But Jasmine wasn't interested in the bigger picture anymore. She had already laid out the framework. The bigger picture is that people like Karoline are standing in the way of real change. She shot back, her tone unwavering. They want to keep everything the same, protect the donors, protect the billionaires. They'll tell you all day long about their plans for the country, but when it comes down to it, they're just playing the game the way it's always been played, because it benefits them. It's all smoke and mirrors. Karoline's face tightened, but still, she said nothing. She felt cornered, trapped. Every second that passed was another second of damage to her reputation, her credibility. She could hear the words in her head, "You're done, you've lost." The thoughts circled endlessly in her mind, pushing her further into despair. She had no way out. And the truth? The truth was, Jasmine was right. She had been playing a part in the very system that she now claimed to want to change. The campaign donations, the foreign money, the backroom deals, it was all part of the game. And now, in front of millions of viewers, it was all being laid bare. Jasmine's voice broke the silence again, calm and cutting. You can keep pretending like it's not happening, Karoline. But this is how the game works. The donations, the influence, the corruption, it's all real. And you can't ignore it any longer. For the first time, Karoline's composure began to crack. The reality of the situation, the sheer weight of Jasmine's words, finally hit her. She had nowhere to hide. The moment she had tried so desperately to control had slipped through her fingers, and she knew it. She wasn't prepared for this. She wasn't ready to face the consequences of what Jasmine had exposed. And as the minutes stretched on, with the cameras still focused on her, the reality of the situation began to sink in. Jasmine didn't back down. She pushed forward, relentless, knowing this was her moment to make history, to expose the truth for what it was. This isn't about one person or one accusation. This is about the system. The people in charge have been making decisions for years that benefit only themselves, and the rest of us get left behind. But don't worry, Karoline. The truth always comes out. And when it does, you won't be able to hide behind your talking points anymore. The camera lingered on Karoline for a moment longer, her face a mixture of shock and mounting fear. The damage had been done. The truth was out there, and there was no going back. Jasmine had won. The only question now was how long it would take for Karoline to pick up the pieces of her shattered career. The studio was eerily silent, the air thick with anticipation. Karoline Leavitt, who had once been poised to claim political victories, was now trapped in a storm of her own making. The damage was undeniable, and she could feel it gnawing at her, like the weight of 1,000 eyes fixed on her every move. The camera, as though sensing the gravity of the moment, zoomed in slowly, capturing every nuance of her expression, the sweat forming on her brow, her clenched jaw, the deepening lines of defeat creeping into her face. Jasmine Crockett, on the other hand, was unshaken. She sat there relaxed, as if she had already won. In that moment, she wasn't just a rising star in politics, she was a force of nature. She had come into that studio prepared, not just with documents and proof, but with a conviction that radiated from every word, every pause, and every glance. Her voice, calm yet cutting, had exposed the underbelly of the political system, pulling the curtain back on a web of corruption, manipulation, and foreign influence. And now, as Karoline sat there, unable to respond, the reality was becoming clear. This moment would be remembered not for the debate, not for the arguments, but for the truth that had been laid bare. Karoline's career, once on the fast track to greater things, was now on the brink of collapse. There was no coming back from this. The public wouldn't forgive her, not this time. The whispers about her connections to powerful billionaires, her role in perpetuating the very system she claimed to oppose, those whispers would grow into a deafening roar, one she could no longer silence. The host, unable to contain the awkwardness any longer, tried one last time to regain control of the conversation. His voice trembled as he cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "I think it's time to wrap up," he said, his words lacking the usual authority they carried at the start of the show. "This conversation has clearly gone in a different direction, But Jasmine was having none of it. She cut him off, her voice steady, but laced with the finality of a woman who knew her victory was already assured. "No, we're not done yet," she said, her eyes never leaving Karoline. "We're just getting started. Because the truth doesn't go away because you try to sweep it under the rug. The truth doesn't disappear when you sit in silence, hoping it'll fade. It sticks. It stays. And soon, everyone will know exactly what happened. They'll know who was behind the scenes, pulling the strings, controlling the narrative. They'll know how money and influence shape the decisions that affect every one of us." Her words were a final blow, a definitive statement that rang out across the room, hanging in the air long after she finished speaking. Karoline, her defenses broken, sat motionless, her world crumbling around her. There was no escape, no recovery. Her silence had sealed her fate. And then, just as the tension seemed like it would break the room in two, something unexpected happened. The host, once again finding his voice, looked over at Jasmine, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Jasmine," he began, his voice more measured now, "you've made your point, loud and clear." He turned to Karoline, his expression changing from concern to pity. "It seems, Karoline, that the truth has a way of surfacing when you least expect it." The camera shifted from Karoline's frozen expression to Jasmine's calm, composed face. It was a look of quiet victory, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops. It was a victory built on truth, on courage, and on the refusal to back down in the face of overwhelming opposition. Jasmine had exposed more than just a scandal. She had exposed the very foundations of the political game, the influence of billionaires, and the corruption that had long been allowed to fester behind closed doors. Karoline, still in shock, remained silent. She had no words left. The weight of Jasmine's revelations, the cold truth of the documents, the foreign money funneled into Mar-a-Lago, it all come crashing down on her, leaving her powerless to stop it. The camera held on her for a moment longer, but the moment of reckoning had passed. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Jasmine turned to the host, a small but confident smile playing on her lips. "The people deserve to know the truth," she said simply. "And as long as I'm here, I'll keep fighting for that truth to be heard. No matter how uncomfortable it makes the powerful. No matter who they are." The host, no longer trying to steer the conversation away, nodded in agreement. It was clear now Jasmine had won this battle, and the political landscape would never be the same again. Karoline, once a rising star in the political world, had been exposed as part of the very system she had promised to change. The audience, the country, the world, everyone had witnessed this moment, and the fallout would be felt for a long time. As the cameras finally began to pull away, the host's final words echoed in the silence that followed. "This has been a truly unprecedented moment in American politics. We'll see where it goes from here. But for now, thank you to our guests. And thank you, viewers, for joining us." The screen faded to black, but the story wasn't over. It was just the beginning. Jasmine Crockett had taken down a political adversary with nothing but the truth and unrelenting courage. And the world had taken notice. The political tides were shifting, and the era of unchecked power was starting to crumble. For Jasmine, this was just the first chapter. But for Karoline, it was the end of a career that never truly had the chance to begin. The truth had won, and there was no greater victory than that.
Thank you for watching our channel Modern Stories. If you liked our video, you should subscribe for more amazing videos like this. Have a healthy and happy day. See you in the next one.